This Choircast podcast is brought to you by How to Not Suck as a Christian. This book is a witty, no BS guide to unlearning the toxic parts of Christianity, like purity culture, apologetics, and the idea that God's love is limited to straight conservative Americans. It's sharp, it's irreverent, and it'll definitely make your fundamentalist aunt clutch her pearls. You can get the audiobook on Audible. Print and ebooks of How to Not Suck as a Christian are available to ship to your aunt wherever books are sold. Welcome to the Unbelief Podcast, your journey, actually our journey together beyond inherited beliefs to a spirituality that works for you. I'm your host, Jeremy. I'm a deep skeptic, also a pastor. We can fix that later, right? No? You have made it to another episode of the Unbelief Podcast. Today it is Drinks and Deconstruction, and we are talking with Crystal, and we're going to hear her story. Crystal, welcome to the podcast. And I guess we got to start with, what are you drinking?
I have an emotional support tea. That's what I call it. It's green tea.
Green tea.
I started that a while ago.
That tea is very green.
Yes, it's in a blue jar, so that's probably why. Yes, it's very green.
And I did not get the tea memo, so I am having a little bit of Johnny Walker Black, which is one of my favorites. So I'm curious.
Yes.
What if you had to look at your life right now?
Mm-hmm.
As a spiritual person, what spiritual beliefs and or practices seem to be working right now? They might not work tomorrow.
That's right.
But like where we are today.
Yeah. So my journey has brought me to really resonating with Celtic spirituality. So I've always been an outdoorsy person. I've always, since I was little, like I was always outside as a kid, climbing trees, playing. And so for me, a lot of my early experiences of God were really through nature. And so that nature is a holy place for me. And so even in pivotal moments of my life, nature plays a pretty big role. And so for me, Celtic spirituality, it's been there kind of like hanging out in the background for years. I found a friend lent me a book of Philip Newell's prayers, and it resonated with me. And there was, little bits here and there, but since I've left church, it's really taken root for me. And it's go ahead.
Yeah, you say it's Celtic spirituality, and I really appreciate that. But I know a lot of people, this will be the first time they've even heard that term.
Yeah.
And clearly you're saying it has a connection to nature, which I did a bunch of research for an app that I was developing years ago. And nature was the number one way that people connected with God who used to go to church and no longer do. So can you just give us, the couple sentence overview? What is Celtic spirituality? How is it connected to nature for you?
So, I mean, you can, people can go back and do all the research about the Celts and how they migrated and ended up in places like Ireland and Scotland and England. But really what has resonated for me, I'm currently working through Philip Newell's Sacred Earth, Sacred Soul. I think that's the way it's. And so it's really, for me, the kind of like hook that gets into me about with Celtic spirituality is the sacredness of all things. So being able to experience the divine in, for me, like a hawk is a symbol for me that is kind of a way that God reminds me that I'm okay. And that they show up at these very interesting times when I'm questioning things or having a difficult time. It usually doesn't fail for a hawk or some version of a hawk to show up. And so noticing that God is speaking to me through nature, I think is kind of one of the tenets of that, and seeing also the sacredness and the divine in other people. And also respecting other paths to God, rather than it being, this is the way and the only way. So I think all of those things, and it is very much like nature based, being out in nature, connecting with the earth, protecting the earth as sacred, which just, I mean, you know, you had me at like, you know, I'm probably like, as a kid, Earth Day was like this really cool thing for me, and all the other kids in school were like, whatever. And I was so excited about it. So I think the sacredness in all things is a huge tenet of Celtic spirituality that I think really like hooks me in and says, I try to see God in everything, but it really gets you to slow down and to pay attention. Where am I seeing God at work? What lessons can I learn from the moon showing up in different phases every single month? What can I learn by the difference of every sunset? I mean, what is God saying through creation?
So you did a little foreshadowing because you said, since you've left the church.
Yes.
And I also know that like leaving the church is generally not the beginning of that process. So, you know, I wonder, where did it start to come apart for you? Where did it sort of start to crack?
I grew up in the Southern Baptist tradition, and I think, you know, they were heavy on us studying the words of Jesus. There was a lot of not so great things that happened in that tradition, but, you know, when you're taught the words of Jesus and you really take them to heart, and you're trying to live by that, then you start to notice the inconsistencies that are there. With how people are living their faith. So I think there was always these little things that were happening in the church that I kind of went, like we had a youth minister who we later found out was an alcoholic, and he was basically dismissed and kicked out of the church. And I understood like not letting him work with youth. Like I got that as a youth, but I didn't understand making him leave the fellowship. And not caring for him and his family. So it was that's hard. So those kind of things, you know, we started out in the Methodist church, and we moved to the Baptist church because my mom wanted us to go to a youth group, and they made my mom get rebaptized. And the little me questioning things, I was like, well, why was her sprinkling not good enough for you? You know, so it's like,
like that's always a funny thing to me. I was like, why does the quantity of water matter? Like, if you like, I know everybody's not like, but if you believe something's happening with the water, like, why is there a volume that matters?
Right. So I think those were those little things. I saw like politics in church, but I think what really kind of opened me up was a little bit in college. And then after college, you know, I was in theater. I was a theater major. So I got exposed to all sorts of different things.
For sure. I'm sure you had all kinds of friends who were going to hell.
Oh, yes. That's what our, you know, the good people at our Baptist Student Union were saying. And, you know, my husband, who was my friend at that point, was in a fraternity. And of course, like, they were definitely going to hell. Yes.
Right.
And what
it's really like, if you go on a college campus, there's almost nobody going to heaven.
Right. And so like, I always would like kind of push back against things. And so for me, I'm like, but these people in the theater department, love me,
Yeah.
even though like I'm the Christian girl. And,
Right.
I found when I was dating my husband, his fraternity brothers were some of the most loving people I had ever met. And they looked out for
Wow.
me and they
Oh,
protected me. So it was like very incongruent. And then also one of my friends that grew up in church with me, was gay,
yeah.
and the way he was treated,
Yeah.
that all of that kind of like was
Mm.
bubbling under the surface. And then I went to seminary, and
Okay.
that's when it really started to unravel for me. Seminary will do that.
Let's talk about that, because
Yeah.
I was unraveling before I went to seminary, but when I was given tools to
Mhm.
engage in the academic study of religion and the text,
Mhm. Mhm.
and I was at a conservative seminary, they did not know that was not their intention to turn out a raging progressive liberal whatever. But tell me about that. Like what was the thing in seminary that started you like that really sort of, I'm guessing, accelerated that thing that had sort of been just starting to boil, right?
Yeah. So it was, we, at that time, my seminary was not a conservative seminary. It was a more moderate, I wouldn't necessarily call it liberal, but it was a moderate seminary. And, it was in the Baptist tradition, but Baptists are always like dissenters and questioners. That's the way, like, that's the traditional Baptist kind of values.
Yeah, they keep there's so many Baptist denominations. Like they keep fracturing because they're like, I don't care. I don't believe this one tiny. We're going to do a whole other thing.
That's right.
I've got three other churches that believe the same way. We're our own fundamental missionary Southern Northern Baptist church.
Exactly. Like it's all of that. And so
it's in the DNA, right?
It is. It's in the DNA. So I think I was always kind of like, I think it was ingrained in me to be a questioner. I think just my personality and then that background. And I had to take Hebrew and Greek.
Right. Yeah.
And
as almost every seminarian is tortured and forced to do.
And we translated Genesis 1 in Hebrew class.
Oh
gosh. Yeah, that was, yeah, you know.
Oh yeah.
And that was just like, our Hebrew professor was also the president of the seminary. And I remember like, I was kind of like starting to pull things apart. And I say seminary like peels all the layers back and like strips everything away and then helps you put it back together. Sure. And when he talked about the Spirit of God hovering over the deep, like a mother hen broods over her chicks. And that was the first time that I had heard God as mother. And I was like, wow, yeah. Ooh, I've been told all my life that as a female, like, and here's this seminary that's like letting me in and supporting me in my call to ministry and teaching me, and then it was also like ethics class and pulling apart those like clobber passages in the Bible that had been used to harm my friend and realizing that, there's all these translation councils and,
and for people who don't know the terminology, the clobber passages are the handful of Bible verses that are used by anti-LGBTQ Christians to say that LGBTQ people are going to hell.
Yes.
Sorry, keep going.
No,
I'm acting as a translator here.
Thank you. And so like for me, like seeing that, like, this one word that so many people were hanging so much hate on had so many different nuances of what it can mean. And someone chose one word. Yeah. And this is why they thought that my good friend who I had grown up with, who was so kind and loving to me, and we were like brother and sister, and he looked out for me in a really difficult time in my life, that he was going to burn in hell. But they loved it when he played piano at church.
Yeah, that's the real problem. If
Yeah.
all the gay people are not going to heaven and they're not allowed to be in church, then you don't have much music.
Yeah.
Or it's really bad.
Yeah, exactly.
I really need to cut in here to give you a little bit more story, which is kind of wonderful and beautiful. The friend that Shelley is talking about here, the queer friend, she actually just heard from him. And, he believed that all of the things that they had been telling him about being queer in the evangelical church, and he wouldn't pursue a relationship because it was wrong. It was a sin. But yesterday, they actually connected, and he told her that he had been sort of deconstructing and, pulling back all the layers and realized that God loves him as he is, and is now going to an LGBTQ supportive, inclusive, accepting church. And he's looking to start dating, and he's 52. I don't know. It's great news. And she wanted to add it to this story because, I don't know, it's beautiful. And it shows that, it really matters when you start opening yourself up and thinking things through and forming your own beliefs. It can improve your life in ways that you just never quite understood was possible.
So seminary really kind of started pulling things apart for me. So I think I started going I was on this more liberal side. I call myself a hippie type Christian. And then I served in a church that was a liberal church. And
what did you do there?
I was an associate of congregational care. So I had gone into becoming a licensed pastoral counselor. So there was both mental health and spiritual involved. It's a special licensure in the state of Kentucky and a handful of other states. So we're
an LPC with pastoral sort of function. Is that what you're saying?
It's actually its own license. So we are Kentucky licensed pastoral counselors. So we actually are a mental health profession in the state of Kentucky.
Interesting.
So, you have to go through hours and hours of counseling and supervision, just like all the other mental health professions. And ours is actually a little more stringent in some ways because it is got this faith component to it. I think they just wanted to make it extra legit.
Yeah, of course.
So I was serving in the church as helping with congregational care as well as
a large church, a small church. Were there lasers in worship?
No lasers in worship. More liturgical style of worship for a Baptist church, which I loved.
Which is liturgical means things that you'll have formal prayers that you say together.
Yes.
It follows a sort of classic structure. And generally that means there's more hymns.
In the church calendar, we would celebrate Advent and Lent and ordinary time. So it was the best of both worlds. And
so cool.
I experienced some pretty intense abuse verbally from the pastor.
Okay. Now you can tell me no.
Okay.
But would you be willing to share part of that story with us?
Yes.
What happened? What did he say?
How
did you experience that internally?
So the church was very pro women in ministry.
Right.
The pastor was not. He had a real axe to grind against women, I think. And I'm going to try to choose my words very carefully. Because he would say things like, I was exploring whether I was actually called to preach at that point. I was still finishing up seminary, starting out in my career as a pastoral counselor, right at the end of after I graduated from seminary. And the Baptists have this, more liberal Baptists have this thing called Martha Stearns Marshall Month of Preaching, where they try to highlight women in the pulpit.
That's cool.
And it was amazing. It was lovely. And I had several people reach out to me to preach. And I came in the office and I was so excited about this. And he's like, I don't want to pour cold water on your calling, but
oh no,
they're just going to ask you to come this month because you're a woman. And so like, that was like one of the things. The other thing that was quite troublesome is, and I can kind of back up. I was assaulted by a boyfriend in college. And so like, I'm aware, like I went through therapy and I'm aware when sexual abuse is happening. And but for some reason, when it's in the church, you don't, it takes you by surprise, and it's very nuanced. So, this is where, really kind of pushed me more towards leaving the church. I was sitting on the front pew. I loved, leading in worship. I loved it. I loved reading scripture with my theater background. I loved to read. Yeah. I love scripture. I love touching all of that, like the Bible, the smells, so I would often get asked to read scripture, and I was sitting on the front pew, and the pastor leans over, and I had, my daughter was like 8 or 10 at the time, I guess. And he leans over and he goes, people ask me all the time if, your daughter, like if she's our daughter, if we're married. And this was right
the worship
service.
Oh my gosh.
And this is right before I had to go up and read scripture. And at the time, I think my brain just kind of shut down.
Yeah. Yeah.
And didn't register what that was. And so I went up and read scripture. I think I was just in auto mode. And it wasn't until I left the church and was speaking with 3 other female ministers. We were just talking about things. And I just I happened to mention that. And one of the ministers looked at me and she goes, that was sexual abuse. That was sexually inappropriate. And I went, what? And it was all of that kind of whew.
Right.
So, there were things like that happened. There were some real things. My name was pretty much smeared when I left.
I'm so
and
sorry.
so thank you. So my goal is not to come on here and bash a church.
No. This is your story though. You get to tell your story.
It was quite painful. And,
so hang on. We sort of skipped towards now you're out of the church. How did that was something you didn't realize at the time. What did you realize at the time that caused you to exit?
So this is really interesting. So, there was another female working in the church. We were really good friends. We were in seminary together. And if I had it bad, she had it worse. The senior pastor did not like her. And so she actually got yelled at and staff meet. I mean, it was bad. But we were doing this training, called Catechesis of the Good Shepherd. So a lot of
this.
You do? Oh, yay.
Yeah,
so a lot of it's so lovely. And so it's working with children, telling the story of Jesus and using parables. And so we were going through this training, and I developed a really close relationship with the women that I had been training with.
Right.
And it was 2018. And it was my last year of training. And I remember standing outside of a church in Birmingham, Alabama, talking to 2 of my really good friends there and telling them what was happening. And I said, I just don't know what to do. Yeah. And they were like, and one of them was on staff at a church, and she's like, this is abusive. I think you know what you need to do.
Oh, wow.
And she's like, we're here for you. We support you. And so, I sat in a Starbucks and wrote my resignation letter.
Wow.
And it so happened that my colleague, the female colleague that I had written her resignation letter. And so we both turned our resignation letters in at about the same time. And I had people on staff say, oh, you can't do that. What are people going to say? I said, I really don't care what they say. This
Hopefully
is
they'll
not
say,
okay.
this is not a healthy system. We need to change it, right?
Unfortunately, they didn't.
Right. That
But
often does not the case, but
I think because of that, like I had been like had all this trauma from church when I was younger.
mhm.
Watched what happened to my friend. That friend died in 2018.
Mm.
And then all of this was happening, and I left my ministry position, and I was like, I don't think I can go to church anymore.
Yeah.
Why do I keep going back to this system that continues to abuse me?
Yeah.
It's like going back to an abusive
Exactly
lover,
like that.
you know?
Yeah.
And
right.
so,
and you're a therapist, like you're a counselor.
I know.
You know all of this. And so I'm sure like there's what I hear, tell me if I'm right. What I hear is this moment where your counseling training starts turning on your life and you're starting to see it through that lens.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that right?
To an extent. And there had been other losses that year too. And so I think like by the time I left the church and I had a miscarriage after I left, a surprise pregnancy and a miscarriage.
Wow.
And I was just like,
that's a lot.
God, that is too much. Like I had 5 losses that year and I was like, like 5 deaths, not including like the whole transition with work and everything. And I said, I'm done. Like, no more. Stopped reading my Bible, stopped going to church.
Yep.
Really like super critical of the church.
Yeah.
Still have some criticisms, but I think I've like earned
justified.
that right.
Yeah. And I know that's one of those, that part of the story is so common. Like the leaving of the church, followed by almost a complete disengagement from any of the beliefs or practices you once held.
Yeah.
And I know so many people experience that almost like a detox, right? They needed space to heal, to let all of that get out of their system for a minute before they could re-engage.
And we did re-engage. We had a church that when we moved, from one city to another, we had this church is about an hour and a half from where we live, and it was the church that my husband and I got married in, and that was the only church where I ever felt at home. Yeah. And so we went back to that church, but every single Sunday I would sit in the pew and just cry. I would just cry. I mean, I couldn't. And even though it's a lovely church, they are wonderful. Yeah. Like it's a church in the best sense of the word. Yeah. I couldn't. And then the pandemic happened. Oh, right. And so the pandemic for all of the horrific things about the pandemic, I couldn't go to church. Right. And so I had to come up with like rituals and things that had meaning. And so that kind of gave me that opportunity to kind of reconnect in a different way.
It's interesting. The way you said that, you couldn't go to church. So you had to make rituals and things. What is that? Like, I mean, you didn't have to do that. Like, where does that come from for you? I mean, like, I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm just saying, like, where does that come from in you?
I think I think church has always helped me. Like most people like church because of the people, but I always like church because of the building. Like I would like the sensory of it and feeling the wood of the pews and like the saying of the prayers and the lighting of the candles. And so there was all these things that had like this kind of ritualistic meaning. And so I think for me, I think ritual is always going to be a part of my life. Yeah. And so I think what it was is the getting out of church gave me an opportunity to find new ways of making meaning, new rituals for me.
I love that. I think that a lot of people miss that piece. Like, I don't mean they like wish it was there. I think and you're a therapist, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think there's something psychologically that rituals do for us, in that we take things that are intangible and make them in some way tangible or comprehensible, or even just allow ourselves to interact with them in the way we interact with other things, that makes them, I guess, have greater weight or impact. Am I making?
Yeah. I mean, I think rituals help us make meaning. I think that's what it is for me. And, so lighting a candle with an intent or purpose. My family still celebrates Advent. I light my little, I use a little remote to light my, flameless Advent candles. And I leave them burning because that's when the world is getting the darkest outside. And so there's something to that for me, of making this meaning of like driving out the darkness and leaning into this season of waiting. So, I think it is about making meaning. I think that's what rituals do for us. And I think leaving church helped me find the rituals for my everyday life.
Yeah. And also, I keep hearing you talk about nature too, right? And seasons, and like that this ritual is really important to you, not just for lighting a candle. It's important for you because it's like, it's interacting with the natural world and the, winter solstice and all of that.
Yes. And I really took that up this year. So I branched out and did things that would be considered heretical. Like I celebrated the winter solstice.
What did you do to celebrate the winter solstice?
So I lit candles and I set intentions, and I thought about what I wanted for the next year, but also leaned into that this is a time of like rest. I'd never rest that time of year. And so kind of leaning into that. And then I celebrated St. Bridget's Day for the first time.
What is that? I'm not familiar with that.
So the quote pagan holiday is Imbolc.
Okay.
But
it's funny. I know the pagan holiday, but not the saint.
So St. Bridget, Imbolc, I did that kind of together.
And for people who don't know what that is, can you explain what those are?
Yeah. So Bridget was, to the best of what I have learned, was a goddess in like Celtic lore. And so for a lot of what people would consider pagans, they celebrate Imbolc, which is celebrating Bridget. And Bridget was the keeper of the hearth and kind of a sign of like fertility. And so there's also Saint Bridget, which is kind of like meshed in with the goddess Bridget. And so I really felt that kind of like connection when I was reading Philip Newell's book, because he has a whole section on Bridget. And I kept like in my meditation, I would see Bridget and I would be like, what is going on here? I have like my cousin's daughter did a tarot reading on me at Thanksgiving. And after that, I started researching tarot and realizing, like, this is amazing. And so I've adopted a tarot practice, and Bridget was coming up in my tarot practice.
Oh, wow.
And so I was like, I need to learn something from whatever Bridget has. I wasn't worshiping Bridget, but I was learning from.
So what is your tarot practice?
So it was funny. I have a spiritual director, and so my cousin's daughter did this tarot reading on me, and it was like spot on. It was almost terrifyingly so.
Right.
And so I started reading about tarot, and I realized like it's all symbols, and it's making meaning and connecting to yourself. Like it's a very, honestly, a psychological tool in a lot of ways, or it can be.
For sure.
And then so I tell my spiritual director, I'm like, you're probably going to like fire me or what, like I'm hiring you, but you're probably gonna be like, no more, I can't see you. Yeah. She goes, oh no, I used to have a tarot practice. There's actually this lovely book about Christian meditations on the tarot. And I was like, what? And so, so I got like a standard tarot deck and started doing that. And then I found a Celtic oracle deck, which is a tarot deck written by a psychologist and Episcopal priest.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, I'm sold. I am sold. And so I really, go ahead.
What is this deck?
It's just it's called a Celtic oracle deck. And I'll get you the information on it, but it is fascinating because the perspective, like it brings in all these symbols of Celtic spirituality, like the green man. And I mean, I can't explain all these things in like a podcast, but what I was saying about the tarot is Bridget came up in my tarot practice. And so it was like, that was a calling to me of like, pay attention to this, learn from this. So what I do in tarot that works for me, I don't do it every day. I do it when I feel led to. It's just kind of one of those practices that I might ask, what energy do I need to bring into my day? Or what lesson do I need to learn today? And then I study the card and look for the images that speak to me. And then after I do that, then I go look at the little like guidebook to see, what does this card mean? And it's been really helpful for me, along with like daily walks in nature, meditation. I have a meditation practice that I do. And so all of those things together, doing some dream work with my spiritual director have really, I told my husband one day, I said, I feel closer to God and more like myself than I think I ever have in my life.
Yeah. So we've made it full circle back to the present. One of the things that I know about you that people listening to the podcast don't is that you are part of our Not Church Discord.
Yes.
And so I'm putting this all together, right? You, leaving the church, finding all these personal practices, and now part of this really quirky community. And I wonder like how community might shape what's next for you.
Yeah. So I think, I'm not opposed to being in a physical church community if one ever comes along that I feel like I could, be in. And that's a big step for me. But what I've found, I got on TikTok because my husband was sharing videos with me, and I couldn't watch them because I wasn't on TikTok, and it was right before the ban or whatever. And I came across your videos, and I was like, oh, he's saying stuff the way like how I think. And then then I was like, but he's a minister. I don't know. Right. And then I was like, I don't know. Like he's saying all the things, and then. But then as I listened, and then I knew that there was this community, I was like, okay, I felt drawn to community. And I was like, well, I mean, I'll give it a shot. Like he says, if you $3, and if you don't want to do it, just don't pay anymore. And I'm like, well, this is low commitment here. Yeah. Like I don't have to worry about it. And, and what I found is, I'm kind of in this, there's little like, the little subgroups in the Discord chat, and this lovely group that talks about mysticism. helps me to feel like I'm not the heretic that some people, some family have said that I am. That, I am following God in this, and that there are other people that are trying to find spiritual practices that resonate for them, that bring them closer to their own higher power. And it's a beautiful group. I love all the diversity and the questions, and I think community going forward will be that people who, even though we're very different, can come together and learn from one another and be in a safe space. I think that's the thing, is that church hasn't been safe for a lot of people. I look at myself and I go, I'm like a white minister in church wasn't even safe for me.
Gosh.
Like,
oh my God. That hit hard, because I am the same. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Do you know, like, it wasn't
no.
So think about all these people who it's not safe for. And I really appreciate the not church community, because it's helping me kind of like tentatively step right back out there. And be in a group of people that I know that they're not going to be like, well, what? You think that? What? You're definitely going to burn for that one. You know, you provoked your salvation. Like, you're out of here.
It's ironically.
Yes. Like, and it's also kind of challenging too, I think, because like there are different viewpoints. So it's like, oh, like, that's interesting, or, oh, that's definitely not for me, but kudos to them for like following that path. Like, that's amazing for them. It's been nice.
I love that you said that. That's exactly what I love about it so much. For the people who are listening, if that's something that you feel like would help you, you would love it. Like, I feel like anybody who's like, maybe, I'm like, no. Yeah. And she's like Crystal said, like, you go to patreon.com/skepticpastor, and it's $3 a month. And we're not going to ask you to give 10% of your income. Like, you just pay for what you get. If it doesn't work, you're only out $3.
That's right.
You stop, you cancel the charge. It's fine. But there's a lot of life there. Crystal, thank you so much for telling your story, because I don't know, I find that I am often most able to process my own story when I am also engaging and hearing other people's story, because I don't know, I feel like there's lots of paths that we end up crossing and being on that other people have been on. And so thank you so much. You're appreciate welcome. It.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. That's it. That's the podcast. Shout out to the Choir Network, to Patheos, to Matthew and Keith, who make everything happen. Now, get out of here. Go do something to make the world a better place. Okay? We'll see you next time.